Hello and welcome to a new episode in the Beyond the Ice Walls series I've been doing for a while now. So, last time we discovered the lands of the Avalons, both Ibermasog and Arfornia, as well as the Islands of the Blessed and even Ogygia, or Ogygia. So, for those that do not know, this is a project of a series I've been working on, covering all the lands inside the second ring outside of the earthly firmament, and this map made by Oha, who you can check in the description down below, will explain basically a lot of things, a lot of information that a lot of people find interesting. And it is a very big project, very big map. A lot of informations are on this map. You can find things both on like the creatures that inhabit this land, the people that inhabit it, what the history was, how people got there. Of course, the world is surrounded by an ice wall that divides it from the second ring, and the only way to traverse it is through 4 gates that open in the Antarctic. So we have the Sentinel's Gate, which we already covered, then we have the Tiger's Gate, which we already covered, the Serpent's Gate, which we already covered, and today we will be covering the Leviathan's Gate. This is the last gate of the 4 big gates that we will be covering, and together with it we will cover the continent of Pitatia, which accidentally I also recently covered, or at least more than covered, just mentioned in my Terra Infinita by Nos Confunden map video. If you don't know what this is about and you're confused at what you're actually looking at, and the map intrigues you and the concepts are interesting to you, then I recommend watching the other episodes first, which will be readily available in the description one below, 1 to 5, since this is episode 6. So now that this is over, let's get right into the explanation of the lore of the Leviathan's Gate. So I always call these Leviathans, but a lot of people call these Leviathans. I prefer the more Latin sounding name, but anyway, let's get right into the Leviathan's Gate. This region has exceptionally deep waters that are subject to sudden shifts in temperature, known for the Leviathan, a sea creature so massive that until recent history it had been thought there could only be one of them. In fact, there's a thriving population of these mightily armored, oddly shaped whales that slowly drift around their region, supporting miniature ecosystems in and around their bodies. With their great strength and body heat, they can crash their way through the frozen ocean during winter. The Leviathans are known to spend extended periods of time in the darkest depths of the sea. The purpose of this is unknown, but it is thought to have something to do with their jewel, an anomalous glowing organ located deep within their flesh, that explodes after they die, with enough force to tear apart their massive bodies. When obtained intact, the Leviathan's jewel is a highly valuable commodity. So, for those that do not know, the world's oceans are like 80 to 90% unexplored. We have like factual proof that there are gigantic creatures that inhabit the deepest reaches of our seas, and things like the giant squid, which was believed to be a legend for literally thousands of years, was revealed to be true just recently through like actual proof by both finding the carcasses and also like capturing it live through the means of recording. Same thing with the Leviathans, I would argue, probably. There are probably some creatures that are bigger than giant squids, or at least their size, that are probably fish originated from, or something to do with like whales or orcas. We can see the size comparison between like a young orca here or a baby orca here and the huge leviathans beneath it. Some people believe there is a megalodon, if I recall the name correctly, which is an ancient species of shark that existed. Some people think it's not extinct anymore, and some people think there are also other anomalies, like there was that one time off the coast of, I believe, like the Arabian Peninsula, there was this one sound heard by like the sound wave receptors that could only be explained either by something completely unnatural happening or by a completely huge, like enormous creature wailing and doing something under the seas. So the possibilities of the Leviathans existing are a lot, especially if you consider the like written evidence when it comes to history. There was a lot of accounts on Leviathans, there are a lot of accounts on these huge whales, huge creatures that live underneath the sea, just like with the Kraken, and the Kraken was real. It was a giant squid. So why not the Leviathans, right? So also the part about the Leviathan exploding is also like a real thing that happens to whales. You can actually search it up on YouTube. There are videos that show whales exploding once they die. I don't really remember the scientific process before, like for this, but I know it happens. So just same thing with the Leviathans. And like the jewel is like a pearl, so that's another thing that's probably pretty realistic. So when it comes to the actual gates, it appears to be way larger in size to the other gates. Usually gates beyond the ice walls are very short, sometimes even like filled with islands beneath them, like the Tiger's Gate and the Serpent's Gate, but in this case it appears that the Leviathan's Gate is much larger and allows for more connection to the outside world, to the second ring, and that's why probably there's so many colonies here, and it looks like it's very populated. So let's see what the first of these colonies are. These are the histories of the colonies that are set up on the fourth gate, aka the Leviathan's Gate. So we have first of all Sydindian, Scandinavia. This place was settled by the Netherlands and later Scandinavians, mostly using cheap foreign labor rather than loyal citizens. The Dutch and Nordic minorities are joined by Indonesians, Indians, Algerians and surprisingly Romani, who make up the largest portions, happy to be around people who don't hold deep-seated animosity towards them. Romani is another name for the traveler population that lives in Europe and other parts of the world. There's a more common name associated with them, but it's a slur, so I cannot use it. But you can just check out what the Romani are, and no, they're not the Roman population of Italy. Then we have Irsh al-Wash, it's a Nomani colony. They are quite fond of the local Leviathans, naming them and marking their plates with carved symbols and art. When one of their favorite appears, townsfolk will send a ship full of offerings to the beast for good luck. So I guess like that's local tradition. Then we have Eodsgo, Burma, so Burman colony. Burmese colony. The mostly Tibetan inhabitants switch alarming fast between harmless Buddhist monk and blood-crazed maniacs. Known for settling disputes with knife duels on thin, free-floating sheets of ice, the goals of being to slay the opponents before falling into the frigid waters. Then we have a French colony. We'll be tracing a line for the French colony here and for the Sydindian as well. The French and the Scandinavians. So the French won the Revolutionary Wars, and Napoleon II, this guy, is in charge of France. At least he was. Now, of course, now he's dead, but he used to be in charge of France. So that is why the French have such a big impact on colonization. While the Scandinavian Empire is the union, like the post-Kalmar Union, so it's like the union of the crowns of Denmark, Sweden, Norway, and some more realms. But funnily enough, I believe that is mainly Sweden, the one who holds power in the Union, but that doesn't change the fact that they also have a big reach when it comes to the colonial game. So as you can see here, we have both. Okay, so the Scandinavians actually had a really good deal here, because they own basically the two main areas, like both Sydindian, and then we have New Friesland, originally a Dutch colony. So it appears that, but the French essentially decreed that it belonged to Scandinavians, and so the competition began to unsettle the Dutch and the Frisians, already living there with Scandinavians and Faroese. You'd think they'd been bred enough as it was, but the four-way ethnic rivalry adds to the issue, as each group refuses to intermingle with the others. Damn, that's crazy. But the Scandinavians basically was one of the powers that sided with the French during the whole French Revolutionary Wars deal and Napoleonic Wars deal. So that is why they have a lot of lands that used to be part of the Dutch Empire, but the Dutch were basically dismembered, and only the French puppet of Pattavia was left in their place. So here the French have Baie de la Bestiole, attempting to monopolize trade of Leviathan's braised products by chasing the beasts into the bay and using their large fleet to prevent them from leaving. Interesting. Okay, let's see what else. Then we have... okay, so we have one of the things I was mentioning, the post-Dutch states. Since the Batavians remain in the Dutch place of origin, so the actual Netherlands, all the colonies that are outside the second ring and some of the ones that are even in the second in the main firmament, they are all part of other realms or have become independent. So we have here the Twee de Werelddeur, I believe that's how it's pronounced, and it's a post-Dutch colony. Some abandoned colonies in contested territory survive by playing imperial powers against each other through balanced diplomacy. In Twee de Werelddeur, these names, man. They've decided to hate the British and French equally and survive on Middle Eastern trade. Many shahs and sultans vacation here to embark on rarely successful Leviathan hunts. So, probably from the Oman colony? Believe it, maybe? Then we have these two parts of this island, which are the Oosten-Koryoginsel, which is a former Prussian colony under Koryogan control, who keep the population from fleeing by not allowing them to build large ships. Also, a few incidents involving hallucinogenic cannonballs tainting their tainting their fish supply has made them skeptical about reuniting with their Zerzuran brethren. Then we have the Deniz Kuyrugu, so a post-Ottoman nation that has earned the ire of the Zerzurians, who periodically send warships to harass their coastlines. They survive by being friendly to the French, who provide the supplies but not much naval support, as their sailors grow increasingly weary of being driven to madness by their sinister weapons of Zerzuran ships. So we have been seeing a lot of mention of Zerzura, but unfortunately Zerzura will not be in this episode. It will be in the next episode, as well as Shangri-La and much more. So today we'll be concentrating on Pitatia, so there will be no explanation for Zerzura, but as long as we keep reading about Zerzura, you'll keep being interested by it, because it's very, very peculiar how Zerzura is explained, if you've ever heard about it. Here we have another French colony, so we will be tracing the line easily here between the colony here and the colony there. Here it's the colony of the Lance de l'Empereur, which is for its no-way strategic location within the gate. The French profit mainly via taxation from this territory, which has surprisingly seen really heavy and mostly free and civilian settlement. It hosts a society that, despite no great military presence, has become incredibly prone to the most militaristic of opinions, as they have Greeks and Scandinavians around them to do the fighting for them. So there is also a Greek colony here, or a Venetian colony here, which used to be Venetian, but whose Greek majority rebelled to form their own nationalistic state with the French support, as aspirations of spreading Greek culture throughout the New World. So it's called Therionasia, and it's a Greek colony used by the Venetians. For those that do not know, Venice, so the city in Italy, usually had these borders here. No, wait, that's too much. They used to have like borders like these, something like this. They used to have a lot of parts of the Balkans at points in history, even parts of Greece, so that is why they had Greek populations to send to these lands. And that makes it more sense. Then we have a Indie della Bestia, a post-Venetian colony attempting to survive as a political, mercantile state, but France's ambition of dominating the gate mean that they are restricted to Middle Eastern trade, much like what we saw with the Twee de Werelddeur colony in the post-Dutch states. It doesn't help that they're consistently harassed by the Therionesians. So this is one of the colonies that kept their Italian Venetian culture, while Therionesia was rebelled, and it just is a place where the Greeks now rule. Then we have the breeding grounds of the Leviathans, which are in these islands right here, and despite the great abundance of Leviathans, fish and other marine commodities, it is unclaimed and rarely trespassed by explorers due to its jagged rocky terrain and turbulent waters, constantly frothing with a subaquatic volcanism. sounds like the territory perfect for the Basque. If you don't know, the Basque established an empire in Thoth, the continent that moves around, and it's called Mandaberia, and they own all the weirdest and worst places to actually settle. So yeah, that's pretty interesting. Then let's actually get to the main content of this video. So the Leviathan's Gate is being done. I believe that's enough of an explanation for the Leviathan's Gate. I think we can go to Pitatia, which is the continent itself. So one thing interesting with Pitatia is, you know how dinosaurs existed? Well, technically they still exist. Like, we can bring them back through technology, and in this case they just never went extinct, or at least that's what I think. In Pitatia, since we do have a couple dinosaurs here, we might be wrong. Let's see what they say about the continent. So Pitatia, the continent of constructs. The first Ottoman explorers of this continent, finding the rivers and bays to bear several bridges, concluded that it already harbored some civilization, an idea that only added to by its discoveries of mazes, fortresses, temples all across the landscapes, not to mention vast areas cleared of trees and crossed by grand highways. And yet, for all the searching, nothing was ever found. Many theories were posed to explain how a people could be so elusive that native Pitatians or Pattasian civilization became a byword for a hidden race used to archaeology, anthropology, and conspiracy theory alike. It wasn't until the Prussian farmer Christian Hieronymus Leichhardt, royal inspector to a Humboldt expedition, campaigned beside a collection of reed huts assumed to belong to some diminutive native race, perhaps a nomadic one currently residing elsewhere, and elected to wait until they returned that he might be the first contact. It was after a year and a half and a particularly bad flood that destroyed some of the houses that he realized the truth, that the ducks he had assumed to be using the ducks. The ducks made these settlements? Okay. And then the mazes were built by pigs. The temples were built by elephantine creatures, and the bridges by the descendants of Civets. Huh. This is a continent where nature cannot be external to mankind, but rather unequal, that there is no choice but to respect, and only a new arrival can think inferior. This is probably the weirdest continent we've done yet. I have these feelings. We have Nova Savoia here, the literal first time I see an actual Italian colony outside of the second ring. So Italy unfortunately was very unlucky when it comes to colonies. They didn't manage to use the opportunities of the colonization era to actually get much of the colonization game, and that is mainly because Italy used to be a French puppet state for the majority of its history, but recently they decided to go their own way, which usually is not really liked by the French, and that is why probably now they have one single colony right over here in the second gate. I mean, sorry, in the second ring, and it's in this weird, and it's in this continent right here. Alright, so Nova Savoia, which is New Savoy, it's a waste basket for non-criminals that were socially unwanted from the north of Italy. Those Francophones and a ruling class of rich Genoese families that have ended up on the wrong side of the Italian government. Interesting. That is very interesting. Then we have New Gujarat, Sikh Empire, a collection of mountains, lakes, cliffs, coves, and islands that have led to a wealth of isolated and unique biotas that are a haven for any naturalist. Interesting, also interesting. We have the Air Stepitators, post-Prussian communities fighting against Scandinavian expansion. So there appears to be two layers of actual like colonization, probably because they were like multiple voyages. So we have like the first colony and the like darker green here, light green as the new colonies, same thing with these. In this case, they are literally two different states, two different people. We have the Erstepitators, which are really like post-Prussians, and here we have the new settlers, and these are these. And the new settlers here on the coast are the Kongens Kist, so they're probably King's Coast in English, which are these bluer color right here. And they're a Scandinavian colony, much like the colonies we saw on the Leviathan's Gates, which means another one to trace for the map purposes, which is pretty interesting. I would have not expected so many colonies for the Scandinavians. Like, they are one of the major empires, but they do have to be somewhat overstretched to rule over all these lands, right? Anyways, the Kongens Kist is populated mainly by Norwegians with a strangely successful banking industry, which has more than enough to fund and therefore efforts to subjugate the unruly Prussians, seeking to introduce invasive wall-building wildlife from Kitumati in order to disrupt the guerrilla tactics of the Erstepitators. It appears also we have some like a great Quilombo slave revolts against the Portuguese, which is backed by the French, which might be allies to the Erstepitators, so the post-Prussians. And then we have the actual colony here that is fighting against the Great Quilombo, which is Terra Preta, which is a Portuguese colony, which is currently evacuating, so it probably didn't go that well. So probably it will become part of Great Quilombo very soon. Here we have a post-Venetian colony, which is Repubblica di Cipoletti, on the verge of a civil war thanks to the influx of Portuguese refugees and Greek nationalists sent from Theronesia. So that is interesting. We see another mention of the issues with Theronesia and the other Venetian post-colonies. Then we have Porte de l'Aube, so another French colony here. It appears there's a lot of them, which is interesting, to say the least. So Nouvelle Aquitaine is the colony, and then we have Port Laube, so it's two colonies, separate ones. The Port Laube, it's a colony where all staunch Catholics, the neighboring new Aquitanians, Putzkans, and Cipoletians are all attempting to chase out the local Holvenists. Oh, this is interesting. So Port Laube is one of the Holvenist states. In case you don't know about Holvenists, I recommend watching, I believe, episode 4 of the Beyond the Ice Wall series, which is the one where the lore of Holvenism is explained, which is a terribly scary ideology, which, yeah, you should really see what it is about. Anyways, let's keep going. We have another French colony here, Nouvelle Aquitaine. Nouvelle Aquitaine is a socially conservative frontier society that has definitely been influenced by the Putzkans. So who are these Putzkans? That's what I'm trying to understand. I guess these are the Putzkans. Republika Putzka, result of an ill-fated expedition that happened right before the decline of the PLC. The settlers, mainly male Polish Curonian sailors and Khoisan women taken during the resupply stop in the Cape of Good Hope, surviving thanks to trade with the older Portuguese and Italian colonies. So this is interesting. The PLC, so for those that don't know, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth was a state that used to exist all the way here in Poland, in Europe, Eastern Europe. And you also have like these big boy borders. Used to include a lot of land between Russia and basically anything else. Used to be very big, very relevant, but at some point in history it just went kaput and died, and that's why we have this independent Poland here. And interestingly enough, they managed to like establish some colonies before they just like died as a state, which is the result as Republika Putzka. Then we have another Omanian colony, Mina al-Fajr, or Fire. The governor is an incredibly skilled diplomat and has good relations with all his neighbors. Alright, that's a simple one to remember. Then we have Roderickstan. That is a peculiar name, to say the least. So legally this is a Safavid colony. The Safavids, for those that do not know, are a state in Persia. So it's what the Persian state used to call itself. It was a dynasty of the Persian Empire, and these are the actual territories they own on Asia. Well, it appears that they established a colony here, which is probably the first time we actually saw a Safavid colony in the second ring, so that is pretty interesting. Let's see what it is about. While sourced from and funded by Safavid Persia, this colony was established and managed by a third-party British company. So already you can see I was wrong, I should have read this first, I guess, but still it is legally owned by the Safavids. So serving to inflate the imperial pride of the Persians, as well to provide the British as an indirect way to extract wealth from Pitatia despite their treaties with the French. So if memory serves me right, I believe that Pitatia was forbidden to be a British standpoint holdout or something like this from the French when they won the revolutionary Napoleonic Wars. So the French, since they won the wars in Europe and the rest of the world, they decided that the British could not hold any land in Pitatia, much like they basically did much like the British did with the French in the 7 Years' War, where they decided that they couldn't own parts of North America, so they took New France. And this is the same thing here. So they don't allow the British to own parts directly of Pitatia, but they do allow them to do these third-party ventures with the Safavids. Then here we have Terrado Braganca. Has a large free black population as well as an enslaved one. Yeah, that's just how it goes, I guess, because of the Portuguese slave trade. Here we have the weed-whacking wanderer. This grazing sauropod is known for whipping its tail to cut down tall grasses along the trails as they walk, thus making it more difficult for pouncing predators to hide themselves in the foliage. So this is what I was talking about. That's a dinosaur, right? So they just exist or something? I don't know. Then we have Kafiristan, that's a slur, isn't it? A wastebasket used by the Ottomans for religious minorities that the Egyptians didn't really want to deal with. Maronites, Druze, Yazidis, sometimes fighting, sometimes cooperating, altogether too much for the Egyptian to even try handling. So not a really good venture. Here we have one of the most significant clades of Pitatia, the pangolins, that have adopted forms of arboreal, fossorial, wandering, aquatic, tiny and immense, this being an example of one of the largest species on the continent that wanders the plains in search of ant and termite fortresses that it breaks into its classic pangolin fashion. So pangolins are one of the major inhabitants of Pitatia, along with sauropods. Then we have Arabistan, begun by the Ottomans as a place to pet rebellious Arabs, continued by the Egyptians specifically for the Shia Arabs of Iraq, then becoming one of the first to go in Egypt's more recent colony of unproductive colonies. They were trying for independence anyways, and their crab flats and dried crab flats could make for deceptive and difficult battlegrounds that they didn't want to fight on. So that's kind of it. So these are like all post-Ottoman colonies that gain independence as the empires of the old world kind of started fracturing and falling apart. Here we have so we do have one successful Egyptian colony here called Nil al-Jadid, Egypt. The Egyptians have a lot on their plate when it comes to getting this former Ottoman colony up and running, again after the Coptic and Iraqi rebellions left it with barely any ability to operate independently. Interesting. So they are kind of functioning as a colony, but they did have a bit of an issue, it appears. Then we have the New Orange colony, Kingdom of the Netherlands. Correct me if I'm wrong, but the Kingdom of the Netherlands is a state in exile, basically because the original Netherlands is gone. As I said, it was conquered by the French and transformed into their vassal of Batavia, so the Kingdom of the Netherlands exists both with the lands in the earthly firmament and in the lands in the second ring. But it is a kingdom in exile, as it does not hold any territories in Europe itself. So the Kingdom of the Netherlands is a violently royalist, so much so that the royal family is considering relocating to here. That is very interesting. Then we have Ardakbat, as appears to be this state here, a nation of Coptic people who exiled to this colony, who rebelled and set up a state in the highlands with the Dutch help. So probably coming from the Nile-Al-Jadid colony of Egypt, I would assume. Then we have Duja Saraja, the Sikh colony here. The French enjoy and even fund this buffer between them and the Golux. Alright, makes much sense. And then we have the actual French main colonies here. We have one in this like semi-continent here, subcontinent, and then we have this huge one called Terra Bonaparte, France. Statues of Napoleon everywhere, but with a ruling class almost like the old nobility in their extravagance. So it reminds ourselves of the pre-revolution aristocracy of France. Then here we have the new... Okay, no, wait, should we do this first? I think I'm gonna do first finish the island of like Pitatia as a whole, and then go to... Actually, you know what? I'm just gonna go and do Kitumati first. Kitumati, the land of a million walls. The island has one particular construct of its flora and fauna that pervades it entirely. Walls. For various purposes, the wildlife across this land builds walls, some massive, some minute, turning much of it into veritable smaids, much to the dismay of the settlers. So we have both Otimacochi, which is a Portuguese colony. A significant portion of the population here are descendants of a failed Mughal expedition that arrived in the early 1700s. Then we have the major colony, which is Nouvelle Corse. Really? We really call this New Corsica? Alright. French. Statues of Napoleon everywhere, and they actually honor his ideals, which they insist the folk of Terre Bonaparte do not. So these are like two opposite parts of the French Empire. We have both of them being very, very enthusiastic about Napoleon since he won, and but at the same time they do process his ideas differently. Here the revolutionary ideals are actually upheld, and here they aren't. They just treat themselves just like the old French aristocracy of the kings in the absolute monarchy that was. Even in here we have another territory here called Pattiti, the land of empty towers. Across this land the animals and plants have a habit of constructing in many different ways towers of one kind or another that can be found across the landscape. So I guess tool building, just with birds that create nests and ants that create what are those called again? Ant hills? Maybe that's the case. Most impressive are the gigantic towers of snail shells glued together by the bodies of those nails, all towering skywards in the shape of gigantic conical snail shells. Such sights have come to be regarded by native and Italians alike. The French are too aloof as a holy magic or something otherwisely significant. So there are two colonies here. One is Cina Volante. As an Italian, I can tell you this name is bad. This is just a bad name. You cannot... This is translated literally to Flying China. But, like, the country. Flying China. Alright, so the Italians cooperate very effectively with the Zunziani, with those under French rule migrating here. They incorporate many of the towers into their architecture and view the colossal snail towers with a degree of reverence. So it's these parts of the island which are actually the majority of the island. But in the B part, which is Auxerritière, is a French colony. Once again, France holds a lot of colonies here. The common ideals of among many Europeans of this time that Italians aren't properly white runs especially strong here, where Italians and Zunziani are often conflated. In some sort of reaction to their neighbors, they have a policy of destroying all natural towers and refusing to use them. So two very different approaches to like living with the land they were given. So once again, the Italians have a colony here, which is surprising since their only other colony looks to be on the little other side of the continent, but who am I to say to the Italians where to colonize, since it does appear they just got the bad end of the stick, didn't really get much of the important lands to colonize at all. They didn't even get the lands here in the Les Généraux, which was one of the best places to colonize. And then we have the actual French. The French being the major colonizers of this whole continent, really making you realize just how much power they hold in this part of history, when they literally own much of the land outside of the ice walls, and even inside of it when you consider all of Europe. So that'll be it for line making, I believe. Since there is nothing to trace for the New Orange Kingdom of the Netherlands, then we can go to the eastern side of the Pitatia continent, where we can find places such as New Lhasa. New Lhasa is a Burmese colony. Most of their territory is fleshly, conquered from the pescadores. When they aren't tormenting their Portuguese neighbors, they enjoy venturing out into the desert and doing battles with dangerous predators waiting at them on bottoms of giant sandpits full of stinging ants, such as said dangerous predators, which appear to be a crocodile of some sort. Then we have the República dos Pescadores, which was the thing they were mentioning here. I'm just gonna assume this is a Portuguese state, a rather isolated ex-Portuguese colony that was quite doing well for itself until the Golux came along, which are the Burmese, often caught between fending off barbarian incursions and kept keeping the cynocephaly out of their trash, strongly considering union with France. Another place France might become the holder of. This is pretty bad news for everybody that lives in the rest of the continent, as France expands their influence. Here we have some of the animals that live in this island. So we have these kind of lemurs, I believe, and probably some kind of lemur. Then we have these like phacosaurus or pigs that create walls by just digging. Then we have the Shasta. Oh my god, I don't what Then we have the Shaksara. Then we have the Saharasta, which is a Sikh empire colony that once introducing Sikhism to Mundo Medio. Not sure what that is, probably just the second ring. Oh, no, wait, it's this colony right here, Mundo Medio, starting to become very fond of Sikhism, which is a Portuguese colony, by the way. Then we have... Okay, so it appears there's like some sort of river here that brings to an inside sea in Pitatia. And it appears that the people that inhabit the sea are mainly Turco-Prussian pirate warlords and settlements established by refugees from fallen colonies. So probably the Erstepitators, which were here, went here too, and also from Turkey, so probably right here, from the Kafiristan colony, I'm not sure, probably yes, maybe from somewhere else. Here we have a North Sea Republic colony, Sandur da Baunland. The population is booming with people who prefer crab-infested mangroves to French-infested Europe. That's very funny. Finally, we have one last colony here. It is the Buhariyat al-Sultan, a colony of Oman, just like many others we saw today. It is a colony that rapidly expanded across the landscape thanks to a pre-built network of roads made by the local grazing fauna. So, that covers basically all of Pitatia. We even covered the Kitumati and Pattiti islands. But we are not done yet, since there is one last very big, very important thing to mention in this episode, which is neither Shangri-La, which is this thing, but it is this mass, this red mass. This is the Goluk Empire. In case you didn't see it once we talked about it, the Golux have been one of the biggest extraterrestrial, I mean, that's not the right word, but you know what I mean, earthly states to interfere with the human history, as they basically colonized Burma. You see this? Where is it? You see this? This is a Burmese Goluk colony. They basically own it. And that is why every time we see a Burmese colony here, it was also Goluk Burma. So that is why. So let's actually read about the Goluk Empire. It's not the huge red mass. It's actually this smaller thing, but it's still part of the Goluk Empire, which I don't know where the homeland is. I'm not sure where the homeland of the Golux are. Probably in one of the next videos, maybe? I'm not sure. I'm not sure where the Golux actually originated from. Who knows? Who knows? Maybe we'll never know where they actually originate from. Anyways, the Goluk Empire holds the territory of Druk Giri Gyu. Golux make virtually the entire population here, given how similar the terrain is to their homeland, and the fact that its resource poor, harsh environment, economic isolation, and savage border girl tribes stalking nearby makes settling the region little more than a show of manliness. Constantly in conflict with nearby Choban nomad tribes, the Goluk warlords see the Vogel raids an attack on their honor, so they continue to sink money, resources, and settlers into the region to keep the conflict alive. Unbeknownst to them, their enemies have only grown more powerful through their continued interaction. The Ahevichi tribe have conquered and unified much of the surrounding region, using the richest weapons, technology, and human slaves plundered from the raids on Goluk settlements. So that explains the history of the Goluk Empire in this region, but there is one more state we have to cover, which is the Havichi Horde. So this is mentioned, of course, in the one we just read about, and the Havichi Horde is massive. And just to make you realize how big this is, in size, it's literally comparable to all of Southeast Asia. So the Havichi Horde is huge. And what are they doing? Well, the Havichi Horde is perhaps the greatest and most ruthless of all Choban hordes. The Golux have truly met their match, and in many ways, they're double. Being so far removed from the network of trade and prosperity that unites the brethren species in Shangri-La, the Choban nomads of the outskirts of Volgivolk civilization are a primitive lot, surviving of the lands of nomadic herders and hunters. The Satvak Choban live in a constant state of conflict, opting for plunder rather than peaceful trade with their lakeside counterparts, contending with each other for most fertile lands to sustain their flocks, fighting off barbarous beasts and predators that have evolved alongside them, and battling the harsh elements and rugged terrain of their infinite mountainous expanses. All of these battles only increasing in intensity the further you go from the comforts of Shangri-La. Just like the Golux, the Avici managed to form an empire through a tribal coalition and conquest of their fellow mountain bandits. So this is a massive imperial horde that literally stalks and raids everything near it, and they do have some connection with something we will cover next episode, so Shangri-La. In fact, next episode we will cover not only Shangri-La, but even all of Zerzura, so just put your belts on for that one, because it will be pretty interesting, I think so. But yeah, so the Havichi Horde is linked up with the people of Shangri-La. So, in today's episode, we managed to cover both the Leviathan Gate, Pitatia, and even the Havichi Horde and the Goluk Empire, which I would like to cover the mainland of the Goluk Empire. So, I will actually search now on the actual map, since it's so huge, for the mainland of the Goluk Empire, and if I find it, or an explanation, I'll teach you. I managed to find the lore for the Goluk Empire, and appears some parts of it were wrong. They are not actually like civilization in the Second Ring, but somehow they are linked with it. Like they are linked with the people of the Second Ring in some way, because of Shangri-La. But they are not linked with like the actual inhabitants of the native lands of those areas, since the Goluk Empire is Tibet, of all places. I would have never guessed this, honestly. So, according to this map, the Goluk Empire is Tibet, and the Burma vassal is this thing here. So, here is the lore of the Goluk Empire, if you want to know about it. The Goluks were not a single people, they were an amalgam, a conjunction of many other Tibetan peoples, driven by war into the most inhospitable reaches of the Himalayas, forced to rely on themselves and to fight out the outsiders, either to take the supplies to feed their own or to defend their own existence. The Goluks have always valued their freedom, and any time a Chinese or Tibetan warlords attempted to subdue them, they would rebel soon after, as they would never accept any laws but their own. Not the lamas, not the lamas? What? Okay. Not the emperors. Oh, the Dalai Lamas. Okay. Not the emperors, not the Dharma, nor the mandate of heaven. The only law that ruled in Goluk lands were the Goluk laws. This, however, was under threat. With the collapse of the Ming Empire into warlord states, the Tibetans began focusing on internal problems, as the outside was no longer a threat. And upon looking inwards, they saw those mountain barbarians, whose lawless hillmen have never accepted the Dalai Lama's law. And so a campaign was launched aimed to kill every last Goluk man, woman and child. It was then that they came. From the west, strange men, tall, wild of face but rich of attire. An old breed of man. They called themselves from before the first town in Tibet was ever built. Among them, though foreigners would later decry, this old simple myth and superstition was their queen, whom they saw as a goddess who passed their powers on their daughter after her mortal body passed. The foreigners promised not just salvation, not just freedom. They promised one thing the Golux did not know they wanted until it was offered to them: revenge. The Golux never let these supposed red-headed giants now ruling them be seen by the outsiders, and few would ever come to corroborate the existence of the so-called Kandahar folk. So this seems to be the actual connection between the Second Ring in the Goluk Empire and Shangri-La. So for those that don't know, Shangri-La thought to be the, basically the Agartha of the Tibetans. So the place where you can access the world beneath the surface, the Hollow Earth theory, and so on and so forth. And in this case, it appears that Shangri-La not only exists, but it's like in the Second Ring, in the end of the Second Ring. And the Golux were just a random population. Here we can see actually some drawings of them. Some random population of Tibetans which encountered people from the Second Ring, from Shangri-La, and they asked for their power, and they were given their power to take revenge upon all the people near them. And that's how the Goluk Empire was formed and forged through death, war, and extermination, creating the Goluk Empire mainland and their vassals of Ladakh, and the Burma Goluk vassal, which is why we have so many colonies around the world and around the Second Ring that are Goluk colonies. So, with that said, I think I covered all I needed to cover in this video. We did the Leviathan's Gate, Pitatia, even some lands up here, and even the lands in here, as well as the Goluk Empire. So I hope you guys liked this video. I hope you want me to continue. Leave a comment down below to help the algorithm be boosted. And like the video and subscribe to the channel, and we will see each other next time.